The moment my sister drenched me in wine, the entire dinner table went silent. I felt the cold liquid running down my face while she stood over me shouting, "You have until sunrise to get out of my house." My parents actually clapped for her, proud of what she had just done to me. I sat there shaking, not from fear, but from something else. I stood up, smiled at all three of them, placed a silver key on the table, and said, "Then you have 60 seconds." They didn't know the key I dropped would turn the entire night upside down. My name is Raya Milner. I am 29, the youngest in a family that never treated me as equal. After losing my apartment during a company downsizing, I moved into my sister Corinne's guest house while trying to save money. She made it clear every day that she saw this as charity. Corinne is 34, loud, controlling, and convinced she deserves everything. My parents, Helen and Mark, always praised her and always found a way to blame me for anything that went wrong. I had grown used to their comments and their coldness, but I still hoped things would improve. I work full-time at a local college as an administrative assistant. The pay covers my bills, but doesn't leave much room for emergencies. I was doing my best to rebuild, hoping that staying with Corinne for a few months would help me get back on my feet. Instead, it only reminded me how little my family respected me. The dinner that night was supposed to be a simple family meal. I helped cook, set the table, and cleaned the kitchen before everyone arrived. I tried to ignore the small insults Corinne threw my way, like when she said, "Make sure you stay out of the way when the real guests get here." I tried to ignore my mother laughing at that comment. I tried to breathe through the tension because I was tired of fighting. I just wanted a peaceful evening. But as soon as we all sat down, Corinne shifted into full attack. She commented on my job, mocked my savings, made jokes about how long I had been living in her guest house. My parents encouraged her, laughing and adding comments of their own. I stayed quiet, reminding myself that leaving the table would only make them feel justified. Then Corinne stood up with her wine glass. She looked right at me with a smile I had seen many times before, the kind she used when she wanted to humiliate someone. She tipped the glass and poured the wine over my head while shouting, "Get out of my house." My parents clapped as if she had done something brave. I looked at all of them and realized something. I was done. I wasn't going to cry or plead or argue. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a silver key, and placed it gently on the table. Before I tell you what that key was for, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment the city you're watching from. I appreciate every single one of you. When the wine hit my face and soaked through my shirt, the shock only lasted a second before something far heavier settled into my chest. It wasn't the sting of humiliation. It was the realization that Corinne had been waiting for the perfect moment to do something like this. The room was silent except for her breathing, sharp and angry, as if I had offended her simply by existing. My mother looked at her with pride, nodding as if this was the discipline I had needed for years. My father leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, the kind he wore whenever Corinne put me in my place. I could feel the wine dripping down my arms, but I stayed still, studying their faces, and I saw exactly what I needed to see. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a burden they were finally brave enough to kick out. Corinne pointed toward the hallway and repeated, "You have until sunrise. I want your things out." I didn't answer her. I didn't move. I simply stared at her and let that silence hang in the room. Silence can be terrifying when you expect someone to break down and they don't. Corinne's husband, Alex, sat frozen with his fork in his hand, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his wife. He glanced at me with an apologetic expression, but he lowered his eyes the moment Corinne looked in his direction. He had gotten used to living in her shadow, and challenging her was something he rarely did. Corinne hated resistance, and everyone at that table knew it. She thrived on control and humiliation. My mother leaned forward and said loudly, "Finally." She needed to hear that. My father added, "You've been a guest long enough. It's time to grow up." Their comments didn't hurt me the way they wanted them to. They only made the truth clearer. They never saw me as equal. They never saw me as someone deserving of grace or support. They saw me as a problem to be pushed until I snapped. But I didn't snap. Instead, something inside me calmed. I stood up slowly, wiped my face with a napkin, and looked directly at Corinne. I watched her confidence grow because she assumed she had broken me. What she didn't know was that for weeks I had been deciding whether to stay in that guest house at all. She had treated me poorly since the day I moved in, making comments about my job, my finances, even the food I ate. She gave me a list of rules as if I were a teenager instead of a grown woman. She inspected the guest house every weekend to make sure I wasn't bringing down the value of her property. I tolerated it because I needed a place to stay, but every part of me knew the arrangement wasn't sustainable. The real conflict wasn't the whine or the yelling. It was the truth I had discovered in her storage room last month, the one she forgot I had access to because she trusted me to organize boxes for her. Corinne had financial secrets she was desperate to hide. That silver key in my pocket belonged to a gray metal storage unit she kept off the property, a place she thought no one in the family knew existed. Inside it were folders filled with documents she didn't want anyone to find, debt accounts, secret credit cards, and worst of all, loan applications she had submitted using her husband Alex's identity. She forged signatures. She filed paperwork he never saw. She took thousands of dollars for personal spending and hid every trace of it. I found the documents by accident when she asked me to bring in an old photo album from storage. I didn't take anything at the time, but the discovery burned into my mind. I knew Corinne was selfish and controlling, but this was different. This wasn't attitude. This was fraud. That was the real reason I didn't panic when she drenched me in wine, because I held the one thing she feared most: evidence that could destroy the world she built. She had spent years making me feel powerless, but for the first time, I understood how much power I had. When she screamed again, "Do you hear me?" Sunrise. I reached into my pocket. The key pressed against my fingers, like a reminder that I no longer had to accept their treatment. My parents' voices grew louder, laughing, mocking, pushing me toward the humiliation they wanted me to feel. But instead of breaking, I felt myself standing taller. I realized this family didn't just fail to love me, they took pride in rejecting me. That moment marked the shift I had avoided for years. The conflict wasn't just about that dinner. It was about decades of silence, decades of allowing myself to be treated like the lesser child, the burden, the disappointment. Corinne thought she had won. She had no idea she had just given me the courage to walk away completely and let the truth unravel everything she cared about. The moment I reached into my pocket and felt the cool metal of the key, everything inside me settled with a clarity I had never felt before. For years, I had forced myself to tolerate my family's cruelty because I believed walking away meant losing them forever. I thought silence kept peace. But as Corinne stood over me screaming, with wine pooling on the floor and my parents treating the moment like entertainment, I finally understood what peace really meant. It wasn't silence. It was escape. And it was control. The very thing Corinne always believed belonged only to her. I stared at the key for one long second, then placed it on the dinner table with a quiet finality that cut through the room louder than her shouting ever could. Corinne's confident smile faded into confusion. My mother stopped clapping. My father leaned forward as if expecting a confession. And Alex, who had been shrinking into himself all night, lifted his eyes toward the small silver object that had suddenly become the center of the room. Corinne was the first to speak. "What is this supposed to be?" she demanded, her voice sharper now that she sensed she no longer had full control. I looked at her calmly and said, "That is your real problem." She laughed, a forced sound that tried to hide her unease. "You're being dramatic again," she snapped. But she wasn't convincing anyone, not even herself. Alex's gaze flicked between the key and Corinne. He didn't know what it unlocked, but he knew his wife well enough to sense that anything she hadn't expected was dangerous. My mother folded her arms and said, "Stop playing games, Raya. You made a mess, and now you're trying to distract from it." She said it as if I had poured wine over myself. My father muttered, "If this is another one of your emotional stunts." His voice trailed off when I looked at him with a calm he had never seen from me. The silence between all of us stretched until Corinne finally reached for the key, then stopped her hand midway as if the object might burn her. That told me everything. She understood exactly which key it was. Her eyes widened, and panic broke through her anger. She whispered, "You didn't." I answered, "I did." My parents looked between us, confused but alert. My father asked, "What is she talking about?" Corinne didn't answer him. Her chest rose and fell faster, and she stared at me as if I were holding a weapon instead of a small piece of metal. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. I said, "From the box you told me to organize, the one with the envelopes, the ones with Alex's name on them." The moment I spoke his name, Alex straightened in his chair. "What envelopes?" he asked quietly. Corinne's face turned white. She didn't breathe, she didn't blink, and in that silence, the years of hiding her financial secrets cracked open. I continued, "This key opens your storage unit, the one you pay for in cash, the one filled with documents you don't want anyone to see." Corinne shook her head hard. "You're lying." But her voice broke, and Alex heard the break. He said her name again, firmer this time. "Corinne, what storage unit?" She couldn't answer. She turned toward me with a pleading look I had never seen from her. She had begged my parents. She had yelled at me. She had demanded the world bend to her expectations. But she had never looked truly afraid until now. Fear made her voice small when she whispered, "Give it back." My mother, still unaware of the truth, snapped, "Raya, stop this nonsense and hand your sister her key." I didn't look away from Corinne as I answered, "If I hand it back, I make myself homeless with no protection. If I keep it, I walk out of here on my own terms." Corinne lunged toward me, but Alex grabbed her arm. That simple action, a husband restraining his wife, told her she was no longer protected. She jerked away from him and shouted, "It's nothing, just old paperwork. She's twisting everything." But the panic in her voice contradicted every word. Alex's voice was steady but dangerous when he asked, "Corinne, did you take out loans in my name?" She didn't speak, and that silence became the answer. My parents looked stunned, finally realizing this conflict wasn't one of their usual bullying sessions. My father tried to regain control. "Raya, sit down. We can talk about this." I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. You wanted me gone. Now I'm leaving." My mother stepped forward and hissed, "You wouldn't dare destroy your sister's life." I looked at her and said, "She tried to destroy mine." Corinne was shaking now, her eyes filling with tears she never showed anyone. She whispered, "Raya, please, don't do this to me." Hearing her beg was surreal. For years, she had spoken to me like I owed her gratitude for existing. But when the truth of her actions surfaced, she collapsed into panic. I took a slow breath and said, "You gave me until sunrise. I'm giving you 60 seconds. My father barked, "60 seconds for what?" I replied, "To decide whether you want this to stay between us or whether Alex deserves to know everything tonight." Corinne broke down completely. She tried to grab my hands, but I stepped back. She sobbed, "Please don't ruin my marriage." Her words echoed the entitlement she had always lived with. She wasn't sorry for committing fraud. She was sorry she got caught. Alex stood up, shaking his head in disbelief. "How long has this been happening?" he asked her. She cried harder but didn't answer. The turning point wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the power they took from me my entire life. I wasn't the helpless youngest daughter anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the one holding the truth. And the truth was, the one thing Corinne had no defense against. I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and said, "This ends tonight." Then I stepped outside, leaving behind the wine-soaked chair, the shocked faces, and the version of myself that used to be afraid of all of them. When I stepped outside the front door, I expected the night to end there, with me walking away and leaving them to unravel. But before I reached the driveway, I heard the door swing open behind me. Alex called my name, breathless and shaken. I turned to see him standing under the porch light, gripping the doorframe like he needed it to steady himself. His face carried shock, hurt, and a dawning understanding that the woman he trusted might not be who he believed she was. He asked softly, "Is it true? Did she take out loans in my name?" The pain in his voice was something I had never heard from him before. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. He had always tried to keep peace with Corinne's temper, But now he was facing consequences he never asked for. I told him the truth, without anger. There are documents in that storage unit you should see for yourself. I'm not trying to destroy your life. I just refuse to let her destroy mine. His expression tightened as he processed that. He nodded once, then went back inside without another word. The door closed gently behind him. But even through the glass, I heard Corinne's sobs rising into frantic screams. Inside the house, everything erupted. I heard Corinne shouting at my parents, desperately trying to pull them to her side now that control was no longer hers. She yelled, "This is your fault. You let her stay here. You made her feel entitled." My mother snapped back, raising her voice for the first time that night. "You never told us about any storage unit. You didn't tell us anything." Corinne screamed again, but her voice cracked with fear, not anger. My father, who spent his entire life trying to appear the calm, logical one, finally lost the calm mask. He growled, "Do you know what you've done to your marriage? To our reputation?" I could hear Corinne crying harder, but not once did she apologize for what she had done. She wasn't sorry for the loans. She wasn't sorry for the lies. She was sorry she no longer controlled the situation. I stood outside listening to the chaos escalate, knowing it wasn't my responsibility to walk back in and manage the fallout. For the first time in years, the consequences were theirs, not mine. I heard Alex demand answers from her, his voice shaking. "How much did you take? How long has this been going on?" Corinne's response was incoherent sobbing. My mother told him he was overreacting. My father insisted the family could fix this quietly, but Alex was done being quiet. He raised his voice loud enough for me to hear through the walls. "You used my name. You lied to me. You lied to everyone." His anger held no violence, only heartbreak. It was the kind of heartbreak people feel when the truth finally catches up to them. The porch light dimmed slightly, and for a moment, I stood there in the cool air, letting the sounds of the collapsing household drift farther behind me. I walked toward my car, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this night. The wine, the insults, the humiliation, the years of being treated like I didn't matter. But I no longer felt crushed by those memories. Instead, I felt something new rising inside me. Strength, not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet, powerful kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. I opened my car door, ready to leave, when I heard footsteps running toward me. I turned and saw Alex again, his eyes red from the argument. He stopped a few feet away and said, "Thank you for telling me." I nodded, unsure what else to say. He ran a hand through his hair and whispered, "I should have stood up for you sooner." It was the first apology of the night that wasn't forced or defensive. I told him gently, "This wasn't your battle, but now it's your truth." He nodded again before walking back toward the house, shoulders heavy but determined. As I drove away, the house that had humiliated me minutes earlier grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The porch light flickered, shadows moved behind the curtains, and the loud voices faded into nothing but memory. I expected to feel broken. Instead, I felt free. The air outside was cooler, cleaner, and every mile between me and that front door felt like a step toward a future I finally controlled. The climax wasn't the shouting, the key, or the chaos. It was the moment I realized I was no longer the powerless girl who accepted their treatment. I left on my own terms. I exposed the truth they tried to bury, and I reclaimed everything they thought they could take from me. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of the small apartment I had moved into overnight. A coworker, Jenna, had given me her spare key weeks earlier in case I ever needed a place to crash. I never thought I would use it, but when I drove away from Corinne's house, it was the only place that felt safe. I woke up with dried wine in my hair, a headache behind my eyes, and a heaviness in my chest that reminded me of everything that had happened. But underneath that heaviness was something new, something quiet, but steady, relief, the kind that comes when you finally walk away from people who never planned to treat you with kindness. I sat up slowly, stretching my sore shoulders, and took in my surroundings. The apartment was small but cozy, with plants on the windowsill and walls painted a warm beige. It felt nothing like Corinne's house, where everything was spotless and cold, where every item was arranged to prove she was better than everyone. In this little apartment, I felt peace, something I had forgotten I could feel. I made myself coffee, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and replayed the night in my mind, not with regret, but with clarity. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a family that celebrated my sister's cruelty while punishing my existence. For the first time, I didn't feel like the problem. I felt like the survivor. A few hours later, Jenna texted me and said, "Heard something happened. Do you want me to come over?" I hesitated before replying. I had kept so much to myself for so long that letting someone in felt strange, but I finally said yes. When she arrived, I told her everything while she sat beside me without judgment. When I finished, she shook her head and said, "Raya, you should have left that house years ago." Hearing another person say that made the truth settle deeper in my heart. She was right. I had stayed because I hoped my family would change, but I learned that love without respect is not love at all. Later that afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I realized it was Alex. His text was long, thoughtful, and heavy. He apologized for not seeing Corinne's behavior sooner, for letting her treat me the way she did, and for the pain she caused both of us. He said he went to the storage unit that morning and confirmed everything. He found the loan applications, the forged signatures, and the credit cards he had never applied for. He told me he was taking steps to protect his identity and his finances. He didn't say what he planned to do about their marriage, but the emptiness in his words told me he was standing at a crossroads he never expected. Not long after, my mother called. I stared at her name flashing across my screen and let it ring. She left a voicemail asking me to stop blowing things out of proportion and begging me to keep the family together. For years, she used guilt to control me. But guilt only works when you feel you owe someone something. I owed her nothing, not after everything they had done. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. That night, I took a long shower, washed the wine from my hair, and put on clean clothes. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the girl my family tried to break. I saw a woman who finally chose herself, a woman who no longer needed their approval, a woman who understood that walking away is sometimes the most powerful act of self-love. Over the next week, I found a small apartment for rent not far from my job. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like freedom. I cleaned it, decorated it with thrift store finds, and filled it with colors that made me happy. Every piece of furniture, every pillow, every small plant reminded me that I built this life by myself, without their support, without their validation. I didn't hear from Corinne again, except through short updates from Jenna and coworkers who lived near her. People said she was going through a rough time. Some said Alex had moved out temporarily. Others said my parents were furious that the perfect image of their golden child had cracked. But none of that was my burden. I had carried their weight for too long. The truth is, I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped allowing them to destroy me. And for the first time, I felt proud of myself. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment which city you are watching from. I appreciate every one of you.